The first thing Flora Powell noticed that night was not the expensive champagne being poured into crystal glasses, nor the soft gold light falling over the ballroom, nor even the two beautiful women seated on either side of her husband, as though they had been placed there deliberately to remind her that she was the only woman in the room who no longer mattered to him. It was the pain behind her eyes. It had started as a dull headache sometime after dinner, but by the time the charity gala reached its second hour, the ache had spread down the back of her neck and into her shoulders, leaving her light-headed and strangely weak. She had tried to ignore it because she knew what kind of man her husband was when he was surrounded by important people. Kang Min-jae did not like interruptions, and he certainly did not like being reminded that the world outside his business and his reputation contained ordinary human inconveniences such as sickness, exhaustion, and feelings. So Flora had sat beside him in her black evening gown, smiling when people looked in their direction, answering polite questions when necessary, and pretending that the woman on Min-jae's right had not spent the better part of the evening touching his arm whenever she laughed. The woman on his left was no better. She was young, elegant, and clearly familiar with him, and although Flora had no intention of being jealous, there was something deeply humiliating about sitting across from a room full of strangers while two women competed for the attention of the man whose wedding ring she wore on her finger. Min-jae did not seem bothered by either of them. In fact, he seemed perfectly comfortable. That was what finally broke something inside Flora. She leaned toward him, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. "Min-jae, I don't feel well." His eyes remained on the businessman standing across the table. "I want to go home," she added. He gave a distracted nod, as though she had just informed him that she wanted another glass of water. "Tell the driver." Flora stared at him for a moment. She had expected at least a glance, perhaps a question. "How bad is it? Do you need medicine? Do you want me to come with you?" Instead, he had dismissed her in 4 words and returned to his conversation. Something inside her went strangely quiet. She looked at the two women beside him, then at her husband, and finally down at the wedding ring on her finger. She had spent 2 years loving this man, 1 year courting him, almost a year married to him, and somehow, after all that time, she was still learning how lonely it was to be married to someone who could look directly at her suffering and decide it was not important enough to interrupt his evening. "All right," she whispered. Min-jae did not hear her. Or perhaps he did and simply did not care. Flora picked up her purse, stood from the table, and walked away without saying another word. She did not call the driver. She did not wait for permission. She walked out of the ballroom, stepped into the cool Seoul night, and got into a taxi. But she did not tell the driver to take her home. There was no way she could bear the silence of that enormous apartment tonight, especially not when she knew Min-jae would probably return hours later, walk past her bedroom without asking where she had been, and behave the following morning as though nothing had happened. So she called the one person she knew would open the door without asking questions, her best friend, Naomi. By the time Flora arrived at Naomi's apartment, her headache had become worse, but somehow her heart felt lighter simply because she was no longer sitting beside the man who had made her feel invisible. Naomi opened the door, took one look at her face, and immediately stepped aside. "Oh, Flora." That was all it took. Flora walked inside, dropped her purse onto the sofa, and sank down beside it. For several minutes, she said nothing. Naomi brought her water, medication, and a blanket, and when Flora finally began speaking, the words came slowly, painfully, as though she had been holding them inside for months. "He didn't even ask if I was okay." Naomi sat beside her. "Who?" Flora gave her a tired look. "My husband." The words tasted bitter. "I told him I was sick, Naomi. I told him I wanted to go home, and he looked at me like I was interrupting a business meeting. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask if I needed him. He didn't even look at me." Naomi's face hardened. "And you still love him?" Flora looked away. That question hurt, because she did not know how to answer it anymore. "I don't know," she whispered. But she did. That was the problem. She still loved him. She loved him so much that his indifference had begun to feel like a punishment. Hours passed. Outside, Seoul became quieter. Inside the apartment, Flora eventually fell asleep on Naomi's sofa. She did not hear the front door of her marital home open. She did not hear Min Jae call her name. She did not hear him walk through the silent apartment twice, checking every room before realizing that she was not there. And she certainly did not hear the sharp sound of his car leaving the driveway. It was almost 2 in the morning when Naomi heard a knock. She opened the door and found Min Jae standing outside. He was still wearing the same black suit from the gala, although his tie had been loosened and his hair was no longer perfectly arranged. His expression was controlled. Too controlled. "Where is Flora?" Naomi stared at him. Then she looked at the time. "You came here at 2 in the morning to ask where your wife is? I asked you a question. And I'm asking you one." His eyes narrowed. "Naomi, she is sick." For the first time, something changed in his expression. "She told me she was going home." "No," Naomi said bitterly. "She told you she was sick and wanted your attention, and you told her to get into a car with a driver because you were too busy entertaining 2 women. Min Jae's face became cold. "That is not what happened. That is exactly what happened." He stepped into the apartment. Naomi blocked his path. "You know what your problem is?" she asked, her voice rising. "You think because Flora is your wife, she will always be there, no matter how badly you treat her." His jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my marriage. I know enough." Naomi pointed toward the living room. "I know she came here sick because she couldn't bear going home alone. I know she cried for nearly an hour because the man she married couldn't spare 5 minutes to care whether she was okay. And I know she has been making excuses for you for almost a year." Min Jae said nothing. Naomi laughed without humor. "You are mean, Min Jae. You are wicked, and the worst part is that you don't even realize it because everyone around you is too afraid to tell you." His eyes hardened. "Where is she?" Naomi folded her arms. "Asleep. I want to see her." "No." He looked at her. "No? No. You don't get to walk in here after ignoring her all night and suddenly decide you want to see her because you finally noticed she wasn't waiting at home." Something dangerous passed through his eyes. Then the living room door opened. Flora stood there in a loose nightdress, her hair falling around her shoulders, her face pale from exhaustion. She looked at Min Jae. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He stared at her as though he had been searching for something all night and had finally found it. "You left without telling me where you were going." Flora gave a tired smile. "You told me to tell the driver." His expression tightened. "I didn't mean for you to leave alone. You didn't mean much of anything tonight." "Flora, I was sick." Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I was sick, and I needed my husband, Min Jae. I needed you to look at me and care enough to ask me what was wrong, but you chose to leave me in the hands of a driver because whatever was happening at that table was more important than I was." "That isn't true." "Then what is true?" He had no answer. Flora nodded slowly. "I have endured enough." His eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I will not wait until you dismiss me before I finally do the right thing." She wiped the corner of her eye before the tear could fall. "I am going home tonight, and tomorrow I will come for my things." Min Jae stared at her. "Okay." The word struck her harder than any argument could have. She waited. Perhaps she had secretly hoped he would stop her. Perhaps she wanted him to finally show her that beneath all that coldness, she meant something. But he simply turned around. "Min Jae," he paused. She looked at his back, willing him to turn around. He didn't. Then he walked away, and Flora understood that whatever had been holding their marriage together had finally broken. The following afternoon, she returned to the apartment. She deliberately chose the time because Min Jae was supposed to be at work. She parked her car, walked inside, and began carrying her clothes into suitcases, refusing to let herself remember how carefully she had once arranged those same clothes in his closet, because she had believed she was building a home. When she finished, she dragged the final suitcase toward the door. Then she saw him. Min Jae was standing in the living room, at home, waiting. Flora stopped. "You're here." "I am." She looked at him for a long moment. There was no apology in his face, no regret, no plea, nothing. She picked up her handbag. "You know," she said quietly, "one day, you will realize how much you needed me." His eyebrow lifted. "You'll look around this house and realize that the woman who loved you, protected your heart, stood beside you, and gave you everything she had is gone. She stepped closer. And when that day comes, I won't be there for you. Min-jae laughed. It was a low, effortless laugh that made her chest ache. Never. Flora stared at him. He shook his head. I will never need you that much. She swallowed the pain rising in her throat. Goodbye, Min-jae. She turned toward the door. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, bare. Someone was walking down the hallway. Flora stopped. Min-jae's face changed, and before either of them could speak, a young woman appeared from the direction of his bedroom, wearing nothing but one of Min-jae's white shirts, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked at Flora, then at Min-jae, and smiled. Flora's fingers went numb around the handle of her suitcase. The woman casually adjusted the sleeve of the shirt that belonged to Flora's husband. Then, with a smile that was far too comfortable for a stranger in another woman's home, she said, Min-jae, darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your wife?